My name is Margaret Doyle, and the day I saw my twin sister's reflection standing in my kitchen, laughing with my husband, was the day the mirror inside me finally cracked. It wasn't the kind of laugh that belongs between family. It was softer secret, and I knew right then that something had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. People say twins share everything: a heartbeat in the womb, a childhood full of confusion, and mirrors even each other's pain. But no one ever tells you what happens when one twin decides to take what the other built. Melissa and I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, in a small white house where Mama hung wind chimes on the porch. We used to trade places in high school just for fun. She'd take my math test, and I'd sneak into her drama class. Everyone adored Melissa. She was sunshine in a bottle, beautiful, magnetic, the kind of woman men noticed, even when she wasn't trying. I loved her fiercely, but I also learned early that Melissa loved attention more than she loved anyone's feelings. Still, when she moved away after college, I missed her. I married David a few years later, a calm, gentle man who fixed broken fences and built our lives one mortgage payment at a time. We didn't have children, just each other, and the kind of peace that comes from simple days. David wasn't flashy, but he was loyal, or so I thought. When Melissa called one fall afternoon saying she wanted to visit, I was genuinely happy. "It's been too long, Mags," she said. "I miss your coffee and those Indiana sunsets." She arrived 2 days later with her usual perfume, a floral sweetness that could fill a room before she even stepped in. The moment she met David, she smiled too long. "Well, Margaret," she teased, "you really married the handsome one, didn't you?" I laughed then. We all did. But it stayed with me. Melissa had always liked to test boundaries the way a child tests the heat of a stove, even after being burned once. At first it seemed harmless. She helped David in the garden, made jokes about trading places again, and stayed longer each visit. Sometimes, I'd come home from the grocery store and find them sitting on the porch, coffee cups in hand, laughing about some story from their day. One evening, I came home early from work. Melissa was in my kitchen wearing my apron. "David told me you were running late," she said, stirring something on the stove. "Thought I'd help him with dinner." David appeared behind her, smiling awkwardly. She insisted he said. I brushed it off, but something inside me shifted. The next few weeks were a blur of small things that didn't add up. My favorite mug, the one David gave me on our 10th anniversary, was suddenly chipped. My lipstick appeared in the downstairs bathroom I never used. And Melissa's visits became routine. She said she needed to clear her head in Indiana, away from her life in Chicago. I tried to be understanding. After all, she was my twin. But it wasn't until that Thursday morning that my suspicion became certainty. I had an early shift at the county library, but before leaving, I noticed Melissa's car already parked outside. "You're up early," I said. She smiled, hair perfectly styled. "Just thought I'd make David some breakfast before he heads out." "You don't mind, do you?" That question, those 4 words, burned through me all day. That night, I sat on the porch long after David fell asleep. The crickets hummed, the wind moved through the cornfields, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I didn't want to be the foolish twin who trusted too much, but I also didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. So I came up with an idea, quiet, simple, and impossible to ignore. I'd been experimenting with a tablet camera for bird watching, trying to catch blue jays near the back fence. That night, I repositioned it just a few inches to face the kitchen instead. I told David I was setting it to catch morning light for my scrapbooking project. He nodded, half listening as he usually did when his mind was elsewhere. The next morning I left for work like nothing was wrong. I kissed his cheek, waved at the neighbor, and drove off with my stomach twisting. That evening when I came home, I went straight to my tablet. I didn't even take off my shoes. What I saw didn't destroy me. Right away, it hollowed me out slowly, like termites in a wooden beam. There they were, Melissa sitting at my table wearing my sweater, sipping from my mug. David leaned in to show her something on his phone, his hand brushing hers. They laughed, an easy, familiar sound I hadn't heard from him in months. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. But it was worse in a way. It was intimacy built on stolen comfort. I sat there for hours replaying the clip, studying every gesture, every smile. When I finally turned it off, the silence of the house felt unbearable. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my face, our face. For the first time, I couldn't tell if I was looking at me or her. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. I'd let them believe I was blind. Because sometimes revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience. About watching the story unfold until the truth writes itself in bold letters. And in that silence, I promised myself one thing. If my sister wanted to play with fire, I'd make sure she remembered who lit the first match. The following morning began like any other, at least that's how it looked from the outside. The sun crawled over the fields, the coffee percolator hissed, and the air carried that faint autumn chill that always meant harvest season was close. But beneath the hum of ordinary life, something had shifted. I'd spent most of the night thinking, not sleeping. My eyes felt heavy, my chest hollow. But my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I wasn't going to confront them yet. I wasn't going to cry or beg for explanations. Instead, I would watch. Let the truth ripen like fruit left too long on the branch until it couldn't hide its rot anymore. David left for work around 7. He kissed my cheek and said, "See you tonight, Maggie." That was the first time I realized how routine our lives had become, how easy it was to pretend nothing was wrong. Melissa texted me around noon, saying she'd be passing by to drop off some cookies for the church fundraiser. I told her I wouldn't be home, but I didn't mention that the tablet camera was still quietly recording from its place in the kitchen. That evening, I watched again, and this time there was no room for misunderstanding. David came home. Melissa arrived 5 minutes later holding a basket of cookies. She laughed, placed it on the counter, and poured herself coffee. David leaned against the counter, listening as she talked. He smiled. Then she touched his arm just a second too long. He didn't pull away. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But they were standing on that dangerous edge where affection turns into something else, something neither could explain later. Watching it hurt more than I expected, not because of jealousy, but because of disappointment. I'd built a home on trust, and they were cracking the foundation without even realizing it. That night when Melissa texted me, "Hey sis, are you okay? You've been quiet lately." I stared at the screen and thought, you really have no idea, do you? For the next few days, I carried on like everything was normal. I went to work, smiled at the library patrons, and even baked a pie for David's co-workers' potluck. Every movement felt rehearsed, every smile a shield. One evening, as we sat on the porch, David said, "You know, Melissa's been through a rough patch. I think it helps her being around family." Family. I repeated softly, my hands folded in my lap. Yes, she's always been good at keeping things close. He didn't catch my meaning. He rarely did. But something about his tone, gentle, almost defensive, told me I was right to wait. The truth wasn't done revealing itself. A week later, my neighbor Jeanette stopped by. Jeanette was one of those women who knew every whisper in town before it hit the wind. "Saw your sister's car parked here again," she said, leaning over the fence. "Y'all having a girls' week?" I smiled politely, something like that. Well, she added, lowering her voice, you just keep your eye on her. Twins or not, women get lonely, and lonely people do foolish things. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I thanked her, pretending not to care, but when she left, I sat on the porch steps watching the gravel road. Jeanette wasn't wrong. The next day I came home earlier than usual. Melissa's car wasn't outside, but I could smell her perfume in the hallway, sweet, powdery, unmistakable. There was also a second mug in the sink, still warm. My heartbeat quickened, but I didn't speak. I simply went upstairs pretending to change clothes, and when I came back down, I heard voices on the porch. David and Melissa were sitting there, the golden sunset painting their faces. They weren't touching, but they were close enough that I could feel it in my gut. An invisible line crossed. Do you ever regret anything? Melissa asked softly. David took a long breath. Sometimes I regret how simple I've let my life become. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't belong to a sister. Simple isn't always bad, unless simple feels like settling. I stepped outside before I could stop myself. Dinner's ready? I said, my voice calm but firm. They both jumped like kids caught sneaking out. Melissa stood up quickly. I know, I interrupted. You were keeping him company. David opened his mouth, but I walked past them straight into the kitchen. I didn't cry, didn't yell. I just kept moving because stillness would have broken me. That night, Melissa left early. David came to bed quietly, pretending nothing had happened. I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every word. The next morning, I wrote a note. It said only 2 things. Going to stay at Aunt Rose's for a while. I need space. Don't call me. I packed a single bag and left before sunrise. But I didn't go to Aunt Rose's. I went to the small cabin my parents left us near Lake Monroe. No one knew about it except me and Melissa. I turned off my phone and spent the next few days alone, thinking, writing, remembering. The silence felt strange at first, like a wound too clean to be real. But each day I began to feel stronger. I'd been living in someone else's comfort, and it was time to reclaim my own. One morning, I sat by the window and wrote in my journal, when trust breaks, don't chase the pieces. Let them fall. The shape of what's left will tell you who you really are. That was the first line of what would later become my story, The Eyes Still There. But back then, it was just the sound of a woman finding her footing again. And as I stared out across the still water, I knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a reckoning neither Melissa nor David would ever see coming. The lake was quiet that morning, still as glass, and I could see my reflection perfectly clear. 2 eyes staring back mine, yet not entirely. Sometimes when I looked too long, I saw her face instead. Melissa's. The twin I once trusted with everything. I spent that week at the cabin living slow. I made black coffee on the old percolator. Read the local paper, watched herons glide across the lake. Peaceful, almost holy, except that inside me, something sharp kept twisting. I wasn't angry in the way people expect. My fury wasn't loud. It was clean, cold, deliberate. By Friday, I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't just sit here waiting for guilt to find them. People like Melissa and David, people who hide behind charm, don't confess. You have to show them their own reflection. I returned home that afternoon. The porch light was still on the same bulb that had shone through 1,000 quiet evenings. David's truck was gone. Melissa's perfume wasn't in the air. The house looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked room to room, touching things absent-mindedly, the chipped mug, the photo of our wedding at Brown County Park, the old cuckoo clock that hadn't worked since 2008. I noticed details I'd ignored before. A strand of blonde hair on the couch pillow, my favorite cardigan missing from the coat rack. I took a deep breath and powered up the tablet camera again. There it was, hours of footage from the days I'd been gone. I watched as Melissa came and went freely, folding laundry, cooking, reading at the kitchen table. David would come home and they'd sit there sipping wine. One evening, he handed her something, a small box wrapped in tissue paper. She opened it and smiled. I paused, the video zoomed in. It was a bracelet. My bracelet. The one he'd given me on our 15th anniversary. I could see it clearly in her hand, shimmering under the kitchen light. That moment hurt more than anything else. It wasn't the betrayal, it was the casualness of it, the ease with which they shared what wasn't theirs. That bracelet was supposed to mean something sacred. Seeing it on her wrist felt like being erased. That night, I called Melissa. My voice was steady, smooth. I was thinking I said, "Why don't you come over tomorrow? I'll make us dinner. Just the two of us. Like old times." She hesitated. "Are you sure, Mags? I thought you needed space." "I do," I replied softly. "But space works best when you close it the right way." She agreed. The next evening, I set the table like nothing was wrong. Candles, casserole, even that ridiculous centerpiece she once mocked. When Melissa arrived, she looked radiant as always. Same floral perfume, same careless beauty that once made me proud to share her face. She hugged me, and I let her. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "You look good, sis. Rest must have done you well." I smiled, pouring her wine. Rest can be healing, so can clarity. For a while, we talked about meaningless things, whether church bake sales, Aunt Rose's arthritis. Then mid-sentence I said, "I saw the bracelet." Her smile faltered. "What?" "The silver one," I continued. "The one David gave me. It looks nice on you." She froze, hand instinctively covering her wrist. "Oh, that David said it didn't fit you anymore." I thought. "You thought you'd keep it," I said, calm as ever. "Just like my coffee mug, my sweater, my husband's time." She set the glass down hard enough that the stem cracked. "You're being dramatic, Margaret." Nothing happened. I know I said, "Not yet," but it was going to. Her face hardened. "You don't understand. David was lonely. You've been distant for years." There it was, the deflection, the twist. She was good at this. Always had been. "Funny," I said quietly. "I used to believe twins shared pain, but I guess some of us just cause it." She stood ready to leave, but I stopped her. "Before you go, I want to show you something." I turned the tablet toward her, pressed play. The footage rolled her in my kitchen, her laughing, her touching David's arm, the bracelet glinting like gilt under the light. Melissa went pale. "You filmed us." "I watched my home," I corrected. "You just happened to be in it." For once she had no words. She grabbed her purse and left without looking back. That night, David came home later than usual. He found me sitting at the table, the candles still burning. "Where's Melissa?" he asked, uneasy. "Gone," I said simply. "You should thank her. She gave you the perfect excuse to finally talk to me." He blinked, guilt spreading across his face like ink in water. "It's not what you think." I laughed softly. "You're right. It's worse." We didn't argue. I didn't want to. There's no point fighting someone who already surrendered their conscience. I slept in the guest room that night and woke up with a decision so clear it almost felt holy. The next morning I called my lawyer. We'd talked once before about wills and estates, but this time I asked about property separation. "Nothing urgent," I said, "just planning ahead." He chuckled. "That's what smart women do." After that, I called Jeanette, the neighbor, who saw everything. "You still have that camera by your mailbox?" I asked. "Sure do," she said. "Why?" "Because I think it's time I stopped being quiet." Over the next week, I began documenting everything: dates, visits, the footage, even text messages. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proof, about dignity. If Melissa wanted to play with trust, I'd show her what accountability looked like. But in truth, something deeper was happening inside me. I was reclaiming my space, not just my house, but myself. And for the first time in months, I looked in the mirror and didn't see her reflection. I saw mine. Older, wiser, unbroken. When the first snow fell that year, it didn't feel magical like it used to. It felt clean, like the world had hit reset, covering up all the messy footprints left behind. David still lived in the house, but not with me. After that night, I told him to stay until I figured out what I wanted to do. I slept in the guest room kept to myself and watched him drift through our days like a ghost. He tried small gestures, fixing the porch light, leaving coffee on the counter, even buying me flowers. But there are some things you can't repair with daisies and quiet guilt. One evening, as he handed me a cup, I said, "Stop pretending this house is still ours. It's not. It's just a roof." He looked up, defeated. "Margaret, it didn't mean." "It meant enough," I interrupted. "You chose silence when you should have chosen truth." He left 2 days later, took his truck, his clothes, and half of our bank account. I didn't stop him. It was strange watching him drive away. Didn't hurt as much as I expected. What hurt was realizing how much of my life I'd built around keeping peace, even when it was rotting underneath. After he left the house, grew unbearably quiet. The kind of quiet that made you notice every creak in the floor, every hum from the refrigerator. Melissa didn't call. I didn't expect her to. But word travels fast in small towns. By week's end, people at the library were whispering. Heard her husband ran off, one woman said, and with her sister, too. I pretended not to hear. Small-town gossip moves faster than forgiveness. That weekend, I packed a bag and went back to the cabin by Lake Monroe. I told myself it was just for a few days, but deep down, I knew I wasn't coming back soon. I needed to start over somewhere that didn't smell like betrayal. Winter in Indiana can make a person humble. The cold forces you to slow down, to look inward. I spent my mornings writing, my afternoons walking along the frozen shore. There's something honest about winter. You can't hide anything in that kind of stillness. One morning, I took out an old notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "The long winter begins when the truth settles and you're left with what's real." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would become the center of everything that followed. Around Christmas, Jeanette called. Saw David at the hardware store with Melissa. She said, her voice dripping with pity. They didn't look happy. "I'm sure they're not," I replied, pouring myself more coffee. Neither of them ever liked the cold. I could hear her pause, surprised at how calm I sounded. "You doing okay, honey?" "Better than I thought I'd be," I said. "I think peace just has a different sound now." After we hung up, I looked out the window at the frozen lake. I remembered the reflection I used to fear the face that looked like mine, but wasn't. I no longer felt haunted by it. The difference between us was finally clear. Melissa lived for attention. I lived for meaning. That realization changed me. I started volunteering at the county library again, organizing a small writing group for retirees. Every Wednesday evening, we'd sit around a table, share coffee and stories. One woman wrote about her husband's dementia. Another wrote about losing her son in the war. I listened more than I spoke, but one night, a man named Carl asked Margaret, "When are you going to tell your story?" I smiled faintly. "When I know how it ends." Carl chuckled. "Honey, stories don't end. They just stop hurting." He was right. That night, I began writing the first chapter of what would become my story of healing, not as revenge, but as recognition. I described the porch, the mug, the laughter, the quiet theft of trust. Writing didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it a place to rest outside of me. By February, the house in town no longer felt like mine. I told David through the lawyer that I wanted to sell it. He resisted, at first said it was too much history to just throw away. I told him history doesn't live in walls. It lives in the people who respect it. Melissa sent me one letter that month, just one. It arrived on a rainy afternoon. The handwriting was still perfect, round, confident. Mags, I know you hate me right now, but I swear it wasn't what you think. David and I were both lonely lost and we made mistakes. Please don't erase me from your life. You're my sister. You're half of me. Melissa. I stared at the paper until the ink blurred. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the fireplace. Watching it burn didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. By March, I was renting a small cottage on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms, a porch, and a wood stove. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Simple things, barns, fences, shadows. My hands, once shaking with anger, moved steady with purpose. And that's when it hit me, revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about rebuilding in full view of those who expected you to stay broken. In April, the County Fair Committee asked if I'd display my paintings at the spring showcase. I agreed, but I changed the nameplate on each one to a simple phrase, "Property of the eyes that stayed behind." When the fair opened, I stood quietly in the back, watching people pause at my paintings. Some recognized the porch, the chipped mug, the lake house. Melissa was there too. I could feel her before I saw her. She stood frozen in front of the largest piece, a simple chair bathed in winter light. Our eyes met across the room, no words, just silence. And for the first time, I saw no reflection of myself in her at all. Only distance, beautiful, final distance. Spring came to Indiana like forgiveness you didn't ask for, but still needed. The snow melted into the soil, and everywhere things began to grow again. Wildflowers on the roadsides, green moss on the cabin steps, and a small kind of peace inside me I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't seen Melissa or David since the art fair. I didn't need to. What passed between us had already finished its course. But in small towns, nothing stays buried for long. The grocery store clerk, the woman at church, the mailman. Everyone had a version of my story. Some pitied me, some admired me, and some just wanted the details. I didn't give them any. Let them wonder. Let the silence tell its own tale. Instead, I turned my focus to living. I took long walks around the lake, planted tomatoes by the porch, and started helping a few local women with their own separation papers. It wasn't legal work exactly, just sitting with them, helping them fill out forms, listening while they cried. Most of them were my age, some older. We all carried the same bruise inside us, trust that had been mishandled. One afternoon, while sorting through my old sketchbooks, I found a small photo from years ago, me and Melissa at age 10, standing by the old maple tree in our parents' yard. We were identical, smiling like we shared one heartbeat. I stared at that photo a long time, then slipped it into my journal. That night, the idea came to me, not revenge, not payback, but a statement. Something that would reclaim everything they had taken without ever speaking their names. I called the local arts council the next morning. I'd like to submit a new collection, I said. What's the theme? The woman asked. Truth, I replied. And what's left when you stop pretending it doesn't hurt? A few weeks later, they approved it. The show would open in June at the County Library Gallery. I titled it The Eyes Still There. Each piece told part of the story without ever saying so. A painting of two coffee mugs, one cracked, one full. A photograph of twin shadows stretching in opposite directions. A sculpture shaped like a mirror split clean down the middle. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I spent nights preparing, sometimes falling asleep on the porch brush, still in hand. The lake breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle, and the sound of frogs singing felt like a lullaby written just for me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't lonely. I was simply alone, and that was enough. When the exhibit opened, the turnout surprised everyone. The whole town showed up, neighbors, old friends, strangers who'd heard whispers of that twin story. Even Pastor Neil came shaking his head in quiet admiration. "There's healing in truth, Margaret," he said softly. I smiled. "Yes, Pastor. Even when truth cuts, it cleans." Then, near the end of the evening, the air shifted. I didn't have to turn around to know they'd arrived. David and Melissa. They entered quietly, staying near the back. David looked older, tired. Melissa still carried her perfume like armor, but her eyes gave her away. Guilt has a scent, too. It's colder than fear, heavier than pride. I pretended not to notice them and continued greeting guests. But when they stopped in front of the main piece, a large photograph titled "The Reflection Broke," I watched from a distance. It showed only a pair of eyes, mine, looking straight through a cracked mirror. The caption beneath read, "You can't steal what someone has already seen coming." Melissa's hand trembled. David whispered something to her, but she shook her head. I saw the tears form, but I didn't move toward her. Not this time. Jeanette, standing beside me, whispered, "Lord, if that ain't justice." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "That's truth doing its job." When the crowd began thinning, I walked outside for air. The sunset painted everything gold. I thought of Mama's wind chimes, of childhood games, of the way Melissa and I used to race through the cornfields. For the first time, the memories didn't sting. They simply belonged to another lifetime. David followed me outside. "Margaret," he said softly. I turned to face him. "You don't get to say my name like that anymore." He looked down, nodding. "I know. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry for everything." "Sorry is the lightest word in the language," I said. "You can say it all day, and it still won't hold weight." He swallowed hard. "I deserve that." "Yes," I replied, "but I hope you do something better than deserving. I hope you learn." He nodded again, then walked away. A moment later, Melissa stepped out, clutching her purse like it might protect her. "Mags, please." "Don't," I said gently. "You've said enough in every silence you left me with." She started crying quiet, small sobs that sounded almost childlike. For a moment, I felt that old twin ache, the instinct to comfort her. But some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. "Do you hate me?" she asked finally. "No," I said. "I just stopped recognizing you." She nodded, as if she expected nothing less. "I wish we could go back." I shook my head. "We'd just break the same mirror again." She left without another word. I watched her car drive away until the sound of its tires faded into the dusk. Then I turned back toward the gallery where my photographs still hung under warm light. For the first time, I didn't see pain in them. I saw freedom. That night, when I closed up and walked home, I looked at the stars, so many, so steady. It struck me that even after everything, I was still standing, still creating, still me. And that realization was worth more than any revenge could ever be. Summer in Indiana has a way of making everything bloom, even the things you thought were gone for good. The air smelled of grass and warm rain, the lake shimmered like glass, and the sound of cicadas filled the evenings. By July, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt like living again, not just surviving. The art exhibit had changed something not just for me, but for the town. People saw me differently now. Not as the woman who'd been betrayed, but as the one who stood up without shouting. Every so often, a stranger would stop me at the farmer's market to say, "Your photos." They made me think. And that, more than any apology, felt like healing. I spent most mornings at the cabin porch with coffee and my journal. The lake reflected the sunrise, and I often wrote about it, how light finds its way even through cracked glass. I called those entries "Eyes Returning," because that's what I was doing, seeing again without bitterness clouding the view. Then one morning, the mail arrived, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a short letter typed neatly. "I saw your exhibit. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I left him. I'm moving back to Chicago. You were right. Mirrors can lie, but they can also wake you up. M." I read it twice. For a long time, I just sat there, staring out at the lake. The wind stirred the trees, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The letter didn't hurt. It closed the last open wound. Melissa had finally looked at herself. And for the first time, I hoped she'd find peace somewhere far from mine. That same week, the library invited me to speak at their summer storytelling series. "People connected to your art," the director said. "We'd love for you to share the story behind it." I hesitated. I'd never been one for public speaking, but something inside whispered that maybe this was the next step. Not revenge, not exposure, but reflection. The night of the talk, the small auditorium was packed. Some faces I knew, others were strangers. I took the podium, hands trembling slightly, and began not with anger, but honesty. "I once believed silence was strength," I said. "That if I just endured, things would fix themselves. But silence doesn't heal, it hides. And hidden things grow in the dark." The audience was still listening. I spoke about family betrayal and the way forgiveness isn't something you give others, it's something you give yourself to stop carrying their sins. When I finished, the applause came softly at first, then swelled. An older woman in the front row stood up and said, "Thank you for saying what so many of us never could." Afterward, several people came up to me telling me their own stories. Husbands who left sisters who lied, children who forgot to call. I realized, standing there, that we all carried versions of the same wound. And somehow, telling mine helped theirs breathe. A week later, I was offered a small column in the county paper, the Reflection Room. They called it a space for weekly musings about life loss and the lessons you don't see coming. It paid almost nothing, but I accepted anyway. Writing became my rhythm. Every Sunday, I'd walk to the lake, watch the sunset, and write my next piece. Some were about the past, others about small joys, the way rain smells before it falls, or how a neighbor's kindness can undo a bad day. Slowly, readers began writing letters back. One note from a widower said, "You remind me that life doesn't stop being beautiful just because it's unfair." Another, from a woman in her 70s, said, "Your story gave me courage to stop apologizing for surviving." Those letters became my reward, my quiet, steady revenge against despair itself. Then in late August, something unexpected happened. The State Museum in Indianapolis reached out. A curator had seen photos of "The Eyes Still There" online and wanted to feature a few pieces in a fall exhibition on resilience. When I read the email, I laughed, a soft, surprised sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. I thought about how far I'd come from setting a camera in my kitchen to standing among artists whose names I used to only read about. At the opening, as people drifted past my work, I overheard one man say, "There's pain here, but it's peaceful." That was exactly what I wanted, to show that pain could be gentle, that surviving didn't have to mean hardening. After the event, as I drove back home through the dusky Indiana fields, I thought about Mama's old saying, "You don't get to choose what breaks you, but you do get to choose how you mend." I smiled, whispering it out loud to the empty car. I'm mending. When I reached the cabin, the porch light glowed warm against the night. I stood there for a moment before going inside, breathing in the scent of cedar and home. I didn't need to look in the mirror anymore to know who I was. The eyes were still there, clear, steady, and wholly my own. Autumn arrived with its quiet beauty, the kind that softens even the harshest truths. The trees around Lake Monroe turned gold and rust, their leaves falling one by one, like pages being turned in a story. I was finally ready to finish. The Indianapolis exhibition had come and gone, and my column, The Reflection Room, was thriving. Letters poured in from readers across the Midwest, widows, veterans, divorced mothers, lonely retirees. Each one carried a piece of pain, and somehow through words we met in the middle of it. Healing was no longer something I chased. It was something I lived inside of. Then one morning, I received a letter, addressed simply to Ms. M. Doyle. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman named Ellen, a retired teacher from Terre Haute. "Your story about betrayal reminded me that forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook, it's letting yourself off the leash. My husband left me in '89, and I've been dragging his ghost ever since. Thank you for helping me put it down." I read that letter 3 times. Then I cried, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because somewhere between the breaking and the mending, my pain had turned into someone else's medicine. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, tea steaming in my hands, and realized something important I hadn't thought about Melissa in weeks. Her face, her laughter, her betrayal. They no longer followed me like shadows. She had become part of a story that belonged to the past, not my present. Still, one part of me needed to close that door properly, not with bitterness, but with grace. So I drove back to Bloomington one Saturday. The house on Maple Street had been sold, the for sale sign gone. A young couple was gardening in the front yard, their laughter echoing against the porch where my old life had unraveled. I didn't stop the car. I didn't need to. Seeing someone else's joy growing where my pain once lived felt like the purest kind of redemption. Instead, I went to the cemetery on Hillcrest Road. Mama was buried there and beside her daddy. I knelt by their headstones, brushing away dry leaves. "You'd be proud of me," I whispered. I didn't become bitter. I just became better. The wind moved gently through the trees, almost like an answer. A few weeks later, the library asked if I'd host a small workshop for older women who wanted to write their life stories. "We'll call it The Eyes Still There," the director suggested. I smiled, it felt right. The sessions became something sacred. Every Thursday afternoon, we gathered around a big oak table, 7 women, 7 voices, 7 untold stories. We laughed, we cried, we remembered. I wasn't their teacher. I was one of them. One of the women. Ruth said something that stayed with me forever. "We spend so much time telling stories about how people hurt us. Maybe it's time to tell stories about how we healed anyway." That night, I added her words to the next column. The following Sunday, I received more letters than ever before. Months later, on a cold November evening, I walked to the porch after finishing my final column for the year. It was titled, "Reflections After the Storm." I wrote, "I used to believe revenge meant making someone pay for what they did. But I've learned that real revenge is living fully when they expected you to stay broken. It's waking up and realizing the mirror doesn't lie anymore. It simply tells the truth, you're still here." As I set my teacup down, I noticed the horizon, the sunset, spilling pink and gold across the sky. For a moment, I felt Mama Daddy, even the younger version of me, who once believed love could never falter. And then, without warning, the porch light flickered on. I hadn't touched the switch. It just came on, steady and warm, the same light that once witnessed laughter, betrayal, and tears. I smiled softly. "All right," I whispered to the quiet evening. "I'll leave it on." Because somewhere, someone might still be finding their way through the dark. So I keep writing, keep living, keep shining that light. Because that's what we do, we women who have been broken, betrayed, and still rise again. We keep our eyes open, not to watch for pain, but to recognize joy when it returns. And if my story ever reaches another woman sitting alone in her kitchen, wondering if she'll survive the silence, I hope she hears this message in my voice. You will. You already are. If this story found you tonight, don't forget to share it. Someone else might need to see that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering who you were before the hurt and becoming her again.